Hey, I know that you're super excited, so am I. I am Dr. Jefferson, and thank you so much for watching Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson. This is a show where we reflect and we talk about popular hot topics in the community and our society here in the United States and abroad, and very difficult, challenging topics. I explore the very difficult topics within our community, within the Black community, within the white community, within the American community, the difficult conversations around accountability that most people are afraid to, step into. I am here for it. So again, I appreciate you for taking the time out to click the play button, and I'm just waiting to come in and rock your world with the next topic. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you guys for coming in. As you come in, don't forget to like and share the content and subscribe and all that great stuff. I am Dr. Jefferson, and I'm the host of Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson. And we will be discussing some pretty sensitive footage. We'll be discussing, I guess, the outset of the footage that was released by Florida deputies just a bit ago. So I had a viewer in Florida send me this news article. And this news article actually has made national news. 14-year-old girl and 12-year-old boy were in a shootout of sorts with local police. And these police officers were put in a position to where they had to make some very, very difficult choices in this situation. So in just a second, I'm going to play some of the footage for you. Let me see how I go here. Bring this up so you guys can see it. Good. Hear it. Video. But yeah, for those of you who have not heard about it, let me know that you haven't heard about it before I pull up the content, and then I can kind of elaborate a little bit more. But to kind of give you guys a little bit of the overview while I'm uploading the share screen. These children were at what could be best spoken of as a group home, transition home for kids. And during this time, I guess they met each other and form a relationship with one another or whatever. And at some point, decided they wanted to run off together. So, as you can kind of see here, this is where their attempts to run off and be with each other ended. Let me see if I can make this screen a little bit bigger for you. All right. Volusia County Sheriff's Office released this video a couple of hours ago. So this is unseen camera footage for the public, and hopefully they've edited it from the previous released footage. But basically, the discussion abroad is how or whether or not our culture is seeding hatred into these young people. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that after we review this video.
Why choose proven quality sleep from Sleep Number? Because a good night's rest is where muscles recover and our minds are restored. The new Sleep Number
So, for those of you watching from the different platforms, okay, I want you to kind of help me to answer this question. This is a shooting that happened yesterday evening. As you guys can see, it was daytime. It's daylight when it started. Progressed on into the evening, late into the evening. And we're talking about a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. We're talking about two teenagers. Okay. So I'm curious as to where it is that all of the uproar, all of the lawlessness, all of these things, right, that have happened over the last year or so, right, that we've watched unveil. Where do we think this type of behavior comes from when kids get this type of nerve, right? Not to just defend themselves, but to actually, you know, take up arms against law enforcement, right? And to think that their plight is greater than the plight of the many, the mass, right? I'm curious as to where we think as a society these types of behaviors come from. What are some of the things that you notice have changed significantly over the course of the last couple of decades or so? You know, with humanity, with people, with the way that we govern one another in our community and the policing of our societies, by police officers, law enforcement, people that we're paying tax dollars in America to keep a watchful eye out for unlawful behavior. And to that end, I want to kind of talk about the laws, right? How we create and modify laws. The one I want to go all the way back to, because they call this a Bonnie and Clyde type of thing with these young people. I hate to have to say this. It seems like it goes without being said. We're not in the same society as the days of Bonnie and Clyde. That's the first thing. For us to think that, you know, the success or the progress of people has gone nowhere in all of this time, right? What kind of people would we be to say that, okay, if it was okay for them, if it was something that wasn't so shameful, we could see the love story behind the Bonnie and Clyde? Because I've heard a lot of talk around this thing since it's been developing over the last couple of hours, overnight even. It's interesting to me that we could be that type of people, those types of people who compare these types of actions of these young folks to that of the Bonnie and Clyde days. That's not to say it was okay. That's not to say it was, you know, short of interesting or whatever when Bonnie and Clyde did their thing. But those were different times. So we're a culture that has moved so far forward, and we have developed so much more cognitively, emotionally. But the thing that I see on the decline is the way that we condition our young people in regard to their respect for law enforcement and in regard to their respect for authority in general. So my question to you guys is, where do you think this behavior has come from? Of course, that's my first question. And the larger question that I put on this post is, what do you think that we will be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? You know, like, where do you think we're going as a society, if at all? Right? Do you think we're evolving in a positive manner? Do you think that we're growing? Do you think that our outcomes are, you know, going to be driven by where we are right now? So we see police officers abusing their powers as police officers. We see citizens overstepping their rights as citizens. We see people being disrespectful of one another for one reason or another, and in such a way that it becomes harmful to a nation of or a group of people. So not just the one or the two, but it becomes something that affects the mass of those people that are a part of those communities, that are a part of those subcultures of American culture, right? And to me, I don't think we're asking the difficult question. Are we people coming to the table who are just becoming aware and complaining about the issues that exist within our society, within our community, or are we people who look to solutions collectively, right? After George Floyd, I think everybody was supposed to wake up. Waking up to what though? Right? Becomes the question for me, because there were a lot of layers that I think were overlooked in us looking at the aftermath of George Floyd, or we're looking at the accountability stakes here, right? And we didn't look at the systemic accountability stakes. We only looked at what was in front of us, only the stuff on the surface. So we looked at the police officers involved. We looked at this young man who lost his life, right? We looked at the way it affected the people who were on the scene, that were forced to watch it because they were there. We also looked at the way it affected a nation of people who watched it from a distance, as people recorded feeling helplessly in their recordings, right? As they recorded this atrocity on their cell phones, on their mobile devices. So how it affected those people abroad. When we look at the full scope of the picture, we've not really identified all of the issues that were revealed in this murder. All of the issues were not identified, because it's like, okay, well, the larger issue is the police officer killing this man and the trauma it inflicted on the community that were forced to watch. Because for one, it was so many things there, and I want to be able to really go into depth and talk about the way that each and every one of these things that are happening in our community affect us, right? On an emotional level, the way that behaviorally we interact with other people in our communities, the people that are not a part of our direct communities or subcultures. I want to talk about the way it's affected us as people, the way that we are now as a result of us seeing and being exposed to so many different things that have transpired over the last year or so. Okay? That's what I want to talk about today. And I want you guys to share with me where you feel we are, where you feel like we have grown, in other places you feel like we've become stagnant. I want to know what your thoughts are around that, because I want us to have a more expanded conversation that leads to growth and transformation in a positive direction as a result of some of these conversations. I feel like we've been talking and talking and talking, but none of us have developed any viable solutions on our end in the community. So let's explore. In watching the murder of George Floyd, the execution of George Floyd, so many people were beyond, well, he did anything wrong or anything that justified the police being called. As a result, the person who called the police on him in the first place was targeted. After he was already dead and people were looking at viable solutions, this guy was targeted, threatened. He received death threats. He was culturally and racially targeted. And this was our response. The community of people who stood in support of justice for George Floyd. We felt like justice had to be rendered by way of targeting the people who called the police in the first place. The things that we see now in the aftermaths of people being arrested or shot by the police, even now, right? The answers that I see people come up with is we just need to stop calling the police. We need to defund the police, right? We don't need policing. We had a mayor in Atlanta that stood behind that notion by her saying that she felt like the police were overstepping their boundaries, right? And they weren't properly, rendering justice, peace, providing and protecting that community, providing for and protecting the community they're assigned to do so effectively. There were a lot of things going on, okay, in this woman's mind, I'm sure. However, when you're a mayor of a city, you're charged with certain responsibilities yourself. And those responsibilities include holding people accountable where accountability needs to be a part of the conversation, holding people responsible where responsibility is a part of the conversation that's necessary as well. And I feel like we as people, we also have to embody those same practices. We have to hold ourselves accountable for the things that we do that are not quite in alignment with positive outcomes. So it's not about instant gratification, right? Because a lot of us will feel better if another person hurts as much as we're hurting when we're hurting. We've definitely shown that as a collective, right? We've shown that part. We've demonstrated our ability to feel that way and to move and project that type of energy onto our communities, the society, and the people that are a part of it, even the ones that are not directly connected to us. Okay. We have shown that that's something that we are capable of doing. Yay for you. But what about when we are looking in and we can identify where it is that we have done things that could have been done a little bit differently, and because we didn't do those things a little bit differently, it led to the outcome that we're now not necessarily pleased with, right? So this is what I came to have a conversation about today. Accountability, right? As a collective, we have to, ask ourselves, like, where do behaviors like this come from? How often is it that we see children at the age of 12 and 14 take up arms against police officers, period? And what kind of behavior is that? What would we call that behavior? Is that, acceptable behavior? Is it unacceptable behavior? Is it somewhere in between? How do we feel about watching these police officers be targeted by young people? What does that say about our culture? Where did this stuff start? And so then I think it beckons an even deeper question. So the type of behavior we would call that is defiant, right? Unacceptable. We would call that behavior questionable. Who raised them? Right? That's a common thing that we say nowadays when we don't approve of things that people do, but we can somehow find a way to tie those people back to us. And so when we're asking ourselves these questions, who raised them? When we're asking ourselves these questions of where do these behaviors come from? They come from a place of complacency, comfort. So these children have become comfortable with breaking the rules, or they feel like the rules don't apply to them. And sometimes they're learning these things directly by their interactions with people, with other people. And sometimes they're, learning them indirectly because they're observing the way that life unfolds for folks around them. And for the vast majority of children, that's how they learn. Modeling behavior. So as adults coming to the table, we have to ask ourselves, what type of behaviors have we modeled for these young people? I think at least once a day, every day, we see a high-speed chase, the police chasing somebody on the, highway in one place or the next place. I think we've seen enough of violence on TV, right? We've seen enough violence portrayed on social media. There is an abundance of inside the school violence, bullying behavior, and things like that go unaddressed, even when we do see it as teachers, because we have labeled a lot of these things as just normal, right? So a part of the process of these kids developing their personalities, these are things they have to go through, blah, blah, blah. We shouldn't be interrupting and we shouldn't be intervening in these particular things because it's between the kids and let them figure it out. The only problem with that narrative is this. If that's our approach to the vast majority of the questionable behaviors that kids embody over the course of their becoming adolescents, teenagers going through identity crisis at those various stages of development, we are asking for the results to be this. I had a very interesting conversation, and actually, I have been having this conversation more frequently with my clients. And I remember this one very, very vividly because it was recent. I had this conversation with a client, and we were talking about child rearing practices and the things that have changed, the things that that person had noticed had been changed and or had been different from their conditioning when they were growing up with their parents to the point where they started to raise their own kids, right? And one of the major components or major themes was around physical discipline, right? We talked about some of the benefits and contraindications of physical discipline and how people respond to physical discipline, where it comes from, where we found this was an effective way to get people to do things that we want them to do and to stay away from behaviors that we don't want them to do, right? I think the perception of the role of a parent being able to render discipline to a child is where this all started. And that's not to say that before the physical discipline part became a questionable thing where kids could say or make the allegation of child abuse, right? That's not to say that before that happened, we didn't have crimes at all, right? It's to say that before, as they say, the government came in and said that child abuse was a thing and child abuse looked like this or that, right? It's to say that children were more compliant because they feared the authority of their parent or the authoritarian. They feared something would happen, right? That was undesired, greatly undesired. And typically physical discipline is something that's greatly undesired. And so the perceptions, I think, of children is what has shifted. And the perception of people when it comes to authority has also shifted as a result of that. And so let's go to. So Kel says that I think that type of behavior starts at the home from the lack of leadership and no true role, right? No true role model that they can see in front of them. That makes a difference. I do agree. But I feel like oftentimes we look at rules and we just kind of look at what's on the surface. We don't really delve into them. We don't try to understand them. So I have a lot of parent caregivers that I've had kind of in therapy and, in coaching as well, in the parent coach setting. And they're like, well, you can't whoop your kids, right? No, this is a corporal punishment state. I live in Georgia, right? So what do you mean? You could definitely give your child a spanking, but it needs to look a certain way. So it needs to be without all of the emotion that comes with it. So of course, nobody wants to discipline their child, someone they love, when they're angry, right? So then you're taking your anger out on your child. That looks a lot different than you disciplining them or taking corrective action, right? That's a whole different thing. Hey, Trey, what's going on? But I think what has to happen is people have to reshape their mindsets around tiered discipline, right? Or respect roles. Because I think that these types of behavior come from people not being able to properly rear their children. And I think that it beckons us having a whole nother conversation, a deeper conversation, to where we're asking ourselves, where do we get our ideals around disciplining our kids and what's effective and what's not effective? Like, Where does that come from for us? Like, where is our mindset when it comes to us conditioning our kids to go out into this world, because that's what we're here for? As parents, you are responsible for cultivating, shaping young minds into adult minds. So that process needs to look like you're teaching accountability, you're teaching responsibility, right? You're teaching your children that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, right? So which one would you rather have, the one that's equated to success for you, or the ones that are not necessarily equated to success for you in the situation? So if you're teaching these things to your kids and you're doing that effectively, so you're teaching them that there are levels of respect that they should have for people that are overseeing them, people that naturally have a higher position in society than they do in certain situations, that are responsible for governing their behaviors. If we're teaching these types of things to our kids, then we're people that are not a part of the issue, but are essentially a part of the solution. And if you're modeling that behavior as a parent, then you might be somebody that another person in the community can see doing that job effectively and say, you know what, I want to model, I want to encompass, I want to embody that type of behavior for myself as a parent. I think that this is something that's really working for this person and their kid. And I think that this is something that's really working for that kid's outcome. So I would love to see my kids succeed in life in this way, right? So in order for me to do that, I'm going to go to that person and I'm going to ask them for feedback as to how they found themselves in a position to rear their kids in that way, right? And then by asking those questions, that person feels even more validated as to how the outcomes are scaling in life for them. So I think that if we're people that stop justifying lawlessness in our homes, right? Because your house has laws too. You just make them up. You're the government. Yep. That's the reality of all of this. You're responsible for governing your home appropriately so your child understands it and, is molded in a way that they are naturally inclined to obey laws and to understand there are ramifications for not complying or obeying laws, right? And to understand that there are processes that are a part of developing new laws, new regulatory compliance when it comes to your household. So I think that parents have to do a lot more work on the inside. If we want to see change systemically as a nation of people, we've got to start doing the work, and we've got to start with our kids. If we recondition the way that they look at authority, we recondition the way that they obey laws, rules, governance, right? If we recondition respect, we may be able to remove all of that extra stuff that comes with the way that the society, police officers, judges, or anybody else can embody preconceived notions around who our children are and how they behave. Because we're a society that holds our kids accountable. That way, people dealing with us will be forced to deal with us in a different way because we've taught them that we embody our own sense of self in a different way. And respect comes along with that. So I have to ask the question of you guys, what are you doing today? Right? And what are you doing consistently? Right? To show your children, the people that you are responsible for rearing and putting out into this world, this cruel world we keep complaining about, right? What are you doing to show them that they are worthy? Not that they are targeted, but they are worthy. What are you doing to show your children that respect is owed to even a dog? Because that's the reality. If we raise our kids with the understanding that everybody should be respected on the surface just because you need to move and practice and live life in the way that you want people to move and practice and live their life in, in their roles dealing with you. If we raise our kids in that way, there is absolutely no way that in this here and now, in 2021, there is no way we will find ourselves repeating the actions that cause us distress. There's no way. It's no way. But we have to start at home, people. We have to start. I was shocked. And I do this every day. I deal with troubled teens every day. And I was shocked. 12 and 14 years old, an entire standoff with police? Come on. Come on, people. Come on. We're not in those days anymore. It doesn't happen. I have a 12-year-old. I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. There's just no way. There's no way. So when things like this happen, we have to ask the questions of ourselves. What kind of society are we? What are we embodying? What practices are we walking in and welcoming every single day that makes children of this nation, where we are all coexisting, okay with, comfortable with doing things like this, right? So I would like to, I want to ask you guys the question. Where do you see us considering all of this stuff, right? George Floyd, the outset of George Floyd, right? Breonna Taylor, right? And that's a whole separate conversation about accountability there. Breonna Taylor, like all of these people, after seeing the Rayshard Brooks shooting, that's a whole, oh my God, that's something totally different when it comes to the levels of accountability and the conversations that we need to be having. After we're seeing the responses of our communities, not just the Black community, but our community as a culture of American people, after we're seeing the collective responses of our communities in regard to these things happening, and then also the targeting of police in Texas, right? We're not going to close a blind eye and say these things aren't happening. The amount of ridiculous crime increasing in the Black community. How many of us are dying on these streets every day? When we're looking at these things, right, I want us to ask the question, where will we be as a nation of people in 5 years? Where do you honestly, not with all of the fluff we put on stuff, but let's take the fluff away for just about 5 minutes while you do this exercise. I want you to be honest. You can go back to lying to yourself afterwards, okay? But for just about 5 minutes while you do this exercise, I want you to ask yourself, based off of what we see in our behaviors and our responses and the way that we're moving right now, where do you see us as a culture of people, as a nation of people, as a country in 5 years? Then I want you to reassess. Take it from the ground up. As a result of where you see us in 5 years, where do you see us in 10? Then I want you to go back and regroup. And I want you to do it again from the ground up. And I want to ask you, what do you see us in 20 years? Don't say where you see yourself, because you're closer to the end stage of life than the beginning, and say, well, I won't be here for that. No, I want you to be honest about where you see the culture, the climate, this country in another 20 years. And then I want us to come back to the table and have this conversation again next week. Let's just say this is like community therapy around accountability. But that's all I've got, you guys. That's all I got for today. I want you guys that came in on the end of this video to go back and watch that video that was released to the public from Florida authorities. And I want you to ask yourselves, where are we when it comes to our accountability and responsibility? Where are we as a nation when it comes to where we are as a result of seeing where these kids are and what they're doing? Where is our accountability and responsibility as a nation? What have we done to show these kids that this was okay over the last just couple of years? What have we done? So that's all I got. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing rest of your day and make better choices. Later days.